Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. It was a rare and blessed occasion when my old friend, Hercule Poirot, announced that he required a holiday. As his loyal chronicler and occasional assistant, I had grown accustomed to Poirot's relentless dedication to the pursuit of crime, and thus the suggestion that we might retire to the countryside for a peaceful weekend struck me as astonishing. Mon ami, he had said with a theatrical flourish of his impeccably gloved hand, even the greatest of minds must pause, to rest, to reflect. This too is the nourishment for the little grey cells. And so, we found ourselves at the Fox and Feather Inn, a modest yet charming establishment nestled in the folds of the English countryside. The inn, built centuries earlier, retained a certain rustic charm, though Poirot's expression as he inspected the creaking staircase and the slightly crooked painting in our room suggested he found the place's aesthetic less than pleasing. I, on the other hand, welcomed the reprieve. A weekend free from corpses, cryptic letters, and sinister glances sounded heavenly. Poirot declared he would devote himself to nothing more strenuous than perfecting the folds of his cravat and perhaps engaging in a minor debate with the innkeeper about the proper temperature for serving tea. It was, therefore, with considerable optimism that I sat opposite him at breakfast on the first morning, the sunlight streaming cheerfully through the window. Poirot, having carefully aligned his napkin and ensured his boiled egg stood precisely upright in its cup, seemed equally content. "A weekend without murder, Poirot," I declared, spreading marmalade across my toast. "What bliss!" He smiled, but I should have known better. Bliss, when travelling with Hercule Poirot, is always fleeting. The first indication that our peaceful retreat was doomed came with the arrival of a woman at the inn's doorway. She stood there for a moment, uncertain, her gloved hands twisting nervously around the handle of her handbag. She was elegantly dressed, though her ensemble had the hurried air of someone who had dressed in haste. A fur stole askew, a pearl earring missing its mate. Her eyes, wide and anxious, swept the room before settling on Poirot with the air of a drowning woman spotting a lifebuoy. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but trembling. Are you Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot, who had just adjusted the salt shaker to sit perfectly parallel to his knife, turned his gaze upon her with mild surprise. "Ah, madame," he said, rising from his chair with a gracious nod. "It is I, Hercule Poirot, at your service." She hurried forward, almost knocking over a teapot in her haste. "Thank heavens," she said breathlessly. I have come to beg for your help. It is a matter of—" Her voice faltered, and her gloved fingers fluttered toward her throat. "A matter of utmost urgency." Poirot guided her gently to a chair, his manner soothing, but his eyes already sharp with interest. "You are troubled, madame. Bon, you will tell to me everything. But first, you will sit, you will breathe, and you will take, perhaps, a little cup of tisane." I sighed, my toast forgotten. So much for our peaceful weekend. "Who is she?" I whispered. Poirot's moustache twitched. "That, mon ami," he murmured, "we are about to discover." The lady introduced herself as Lady Winifred Langley, widow of the late Sir Horace Langley, and mistress of Langley Court, an old estate a few miles away. Her hands, slender and trembling, clasped tightly together as she explained her predicament. "My butler, Mr. Barrow, he has vanished," she said. "Disappeared completely." I made a sympathetic noise, but Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Vanished, madame? How so? Men do not simply evaporate." "That's just it," she said. "He retired to his room as usual last night. This morning, he was gone. His clothes, his belongings, everything left behind. It is as though he walked out into the night wearing only his dressing gown." Poirot steepled his fingers. A man does not vanish for no reason. Had he any enemies in the household? Lady Winifred hesitated. No, not enemies precisely, but there were tensions. I leaned forward, fascinated despite myself. But why come to us? Surely a missing butler is a matter for the police. She shook her head, her expression troubled. It isn't just his disappearance. It's what he left behind. From her handbag, she withdrew a photograph, an image of the grand dining table at Langley Court. In its center stood a silver tray, and upon it rested a single, perfectly pristine white glove. Poirot leaned in, studying the photograph with intense interest. A glove, mon ami, he said softly. And not two. Only one. Most intriguing. Do you see now? Lady Winifred whispered. This is no ordinary disappearance. There's something terribly wrong at Langley Court. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. Mon ami, he said, turning to me with his familiar theatrical smile. Our holiday, she is over. Let us discover what secrets hide within the house where the butler vanished. Lady Winifred Langley sat with her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between Poirot and myself. Though the sunlight streamed cheerfully through the inn's windows, her presence had cast an undeniable shadow over our pleasant breakfast. It is not merely the disappearance, she began, voice trembling. Langley Court, my home, has a history. It has always been a house of secrets. Poirot leaned forward, his fingertips pressed lightly together. Précisément, madame, and where there are secrets, there is always danger. She gave a small, involuntary shudder. Years ago, my husband, Sir Horace, was fond of hosting rather theatrical parties. Games of intrigue, you see, treasure hunts, secret passages, the lot of it. The house was made for such things. But over time, these games gave way to something darker. I exchanged a glance with Poirot, intrigued despite myself. There was something deliciously eerie about the notion of a house designed for mischief, now harbouring something far more serious. Mr. Barrow, my butler, she continued, knew more about Langley Court than anyone. Every secret door, every hidden panel. And now he is gone. Vanished, like smoke into the air, I added helpfully, only for Poirot to shake his head. Non, Hastings. No man vanishes without a cause. A cause, his finger tapped the table lightly, that often lies in the heart of human nature itself. Lady Winifred lowered her voice. There were quarrels, whispers, old debts and older grudges. And then, the glove. Her breath caught. Poirot's eyes glittered with excitement. Bon, it is the perfect case, mon ami. A house full of secrets, a vanished servant, and a glove most mysterious. The little grey cells were already dancing. No, I said firmly, as Poirot dabbed at his moustache with his napkin. No, Poirot. We came here for a peaceful weekend. Rest, you said. Rest for your little grey cells. Poirot spread his hands in a gesture of exaggerated helplessness. But, mon ami, the little grey cells, they are curious creatures. When they sniff out a puzzle, they cannot resist. I groaned. It's always the same, a perfectly innocent weekend, and suddenly we are neck-deep in missing butlers, secret rooms, and, what was it this time? A single glove on a tray. Ah! Poirot's index finger shot upward. Not just any glove, Hastings. A white glove, deliberately placed, like a performer setting the stage. He turned to Lady Winifred. Madame, fear not. Hercule Poirot shall assist you. She exhaled in visible relief. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, thank you. And Langley Court, Poirot added, his eyes gleaming. She will surrender her secrets, they always do. I made a final, futile attempt at reason. Poirot, we haven't even finished breakfast. Poirot's expression was pure innocence. Breakfast, it can wait. But a mystery, a true mystery. She waits for no man. I sighed heavily, knowing resistance was useless. Very well, I muttered. But if this turns into a ghost hunt, Poirot, I refuse to participate. Poirot chuckled softly. Ghosts, mon ami? Non, it is not the dead who intrigue me. It is always the living. With that, the fate of our weekend was sealed. The countryside retreat had transformed into a case, and once again, I found myself trailing after Hercule Poirot into the heart of another baffling enigma. Langley Court stood at the end of a long, winding drive, partially hidden behind a row of ancient yew trees whose twisted branches seemed to guard the estate like silent sentinels. The house itself, though once grand, had the unmistakable air of faded splendor, its windows clouded with age, its stone facade weathered and weary. As our carriage approached, I could not help but reflect that the house suited Lady Winifred's troubled state perfectly. It was a house with too many memories, and perhaps too many ghosts. Mon ami, Poirot remarked as we drew near the entrance. Behold, Langley Court. A house with secrets, n'est-ce pas? One sees it at once. It does not smile at us. I could not argue. There was something undeniably gloomy about the place, as if it held its breath in expectation of some fresh disaster. The gravel crunched beneath our wheels as the carriage drew to a halt, and the great oak door swung open before we had even disembarked. A thin maid with pinched features stood there, her eyes darting nervously to and fro, as though expecting something, or someone, to leap out from the shadows. She curtsied quickly and led us into the grand hall. Despite the high ceilings and marble floor, there was a stifling atmosphere about the place. The air itself felt heavy, as though saturated with secrets long whispered but never truly spoken aloud. Poirot paused to straighten a crooked vase on the hall table, then ran a fingertip thoughtfully along the banister, inspecting it for dust. Hastings, he said softly. A house, she speaks. If one listens carefully, the walls, they tell you stories. But first, we must meet the players upon this particular stage. With that, we were ushered into the drawing room, and the first of the Langley household came into view. Lady Winifred stood to greet us, her hands clasped tightly, as though wringing some invisible cloth. She looked paler than she had at the inn, her nervousness magnified within the oppressive walls of her home. Beside her lounged Miss Cecilia Langley, a striking woman in her late 20s, dressed in a fashionably daring gown of deep emerald silk. She glanced at us with detached curiosity, as though we were a mildly interesting interruption to an otherwise tedious afternoon. Cecilia, Lady Winifred said, her voice brittle. This is Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings. Cecilia's mouth curved into a smile that did not touch her eyes. Charmed. Standing slightly apart was Mr. Giles Langley, a man in his early 30s with a roguish charm and a carelessness about his dress that suggested he had only recently rolled out of bed. He offered a lazy bow, the corners of his mouth quirking up as though he found the whole situation rather amusing. Before introductions could proceed further, the door swung open with a theatrical flourish, and in swept Chef Pierre, a stout Frenchman with a gleaming bald head, a fiercely curled moustache, which I suspected was waxed into place, and an expression of perpetual outrage. Mais non! He cried, his arms flung wide in dramatic despair. The English detectives arrive, and no one tells me. I would have prepared a soufflé in their honour. Poirot's moustache twitched in faint amusement, but before he could reply, a final figure entered. Mr. Henry Rathbone, the family solicitor, lean and pale with a perpetual frown, as though the weight of the Langley estate had permanently bent his spine. The room was heavy with strained politeness, each face carefully composed, yet beneath the surface, suspicion flickered in every glance. Poirot clasped his hands together. Bon, now, mesdames et messieurs, let us begin. It was a peculiar thing, the way the mere mention of Mr. Barrow seemed to tighten the air in the room. Poirot, ever the keen observer, needed no magnifying glass to detect the ripple of discomfort that passed over each face. Mr. Barrow, Lady Winifred began delicately, was with us for many years. He was discreet and capable, perhaps too capable. Too capable? I asked, surprised. A faint flush crept into her cheeks. He knew everything, The household accounts, the family secrets, how shall I put it, the private misfortunes. And the quarrels, added Cecilia dryly, examining her perfectly painted nails. Barrow had a gift for knowing precisely how to put people in their place. Poirot gave a polite nod, but his gaze sharpened slightly. Madame, it is a curious quality, to be both trusted and disliked. One wonders, did Mr. Barrow have enemies within these walls? Giles gave a short laugh, as though the question amused him. Enemies? I suppose you could say that. Barrow was loyal to the house, not to the people in it. He knew everyone's weaknesses, and made certain they knew he knew. Ah, Poirot's moustache quivered. A man who gathers secrets. He is like a wasp at a picnic, n'est-ce pas? Tolerated, but feared. Feared? I repeated. Surely you exaggerate. No, Lady Winifred said quietly. You do not understand, Captain Hastings. Barrow had a way of making one feel exposed. If a debt was owed, he knew. If a letter was intercepted, he knew. And if a confidence was betrayed, you may be sure it was he who had seen it happen. I began to understand why the atmosphere in the house felt so strained. Barrow was not merely a butler, he was a mirror, reflecting every hidden flaw back at those who served or lived beside him. Each member of the household seemed both relieved and terrified that he was gone. Poirot tapped his fingers together, satisfied. Every person here, mon ami, had a reason to resent this Barrow, and when all resent a man, it takes very little for one to act. Barrow's bedroom, when we inspected it, was a study in unnerving perfection. His bed was precisely made, the sheets as smooth as glass. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, standing neatly together beneath the wardrobe. The surface of his writing desk was spotless, with no papers scattered, no clutter of any kind. Odd, I remarked. It's almost too neat. Poirot raised an elegant finger. Exactement, Hastings. This room, it does not breathe. What do you mean? Poirot stepped lightly into the room, his sharp eyes scanning the walls, the corners, the floor beneath the bed. A man who lives in a room leaves something of himself behind. A scrap of paper, a collar stud, a book half read. This, he gestured at the eerie neatness. This is not the room of a man who vanished unexpectedly. This is the room of a man who prepared to vanish. I stared at him. You think Barrow planned his disappearance? Perhaps. Or perhaps someone ensured his room looked that way after he was gone. To suggest order where there was none. Poirot's gaze settled on the desk. A man who knows everyone's secrets surely keeps his own. With careful precision, he opened each drawer. They were empty, save for a single key, tied with a black ribbon, resting in the top drawer. Poirot picked it up, examining it closely. Curious. This key, it is too ornate for a servant's use. Perhaps it belonged to his personal trunk. Poirot shook his head. Non, a trunk key is practical. This key, it is important. It speaks of something hidden. A thorough search revealed nothing further, until Poirot paused beside the small bedside table. His fingers traced the faint outline of where something had once stood, something now missing. Mon ami, he said softly. There was once a book here, a diary perhaps, and now, poof, it has disappeared. I frowned. Why would someone steal Barrow's diary? Poirot smiled cryptically. Why indeed? You see, Hastings, a diary, it does not record facts alone. It records thoughts, and thoughts, mon ami, are far more dangerous. The infamous silver tray and the single white glove were placed before us on a side table in Lady Winifred's drawing room. I had seen many curious exhibits during my time with Poirot, blood-stained letters, shattered ornaments, and once even a severed ear. But there was something particularly eerie about a single glove, resting so serenely on its gleaming pedestal. Poirot approached the display with almost reverent delicacy, his head tilted slightly to one side, his fingertips poised just above the tray's edge. Mon ami, he said, you observe? I observe a glove on a tray, I replied rather too bluntly. Poirot sighed. That long-suffering sigh I knew so well. You see, Hastings, but do you observe? He bent closer, his nostrils twitching slightly like a cat detecting something beyond human senses. Ah, he murmured. The faintest trace, but unmistakable. What is it? Lavender, Poirot said. Delicate, but clinging, and something else. He drew a small white handkerchief from his pocket and lightly pressed it to the tray's surface. When he held the cloth up to the light, I saw the faintest smear of something dark and greasy. Oil? I guessed. Poirot shook his head. No, not oil, but metal. A trace left by something that was handled immediately before the tray was placed. A key, perhaps, or a tool. He stepped back, his eyes alight with that inward gleam that always heralded some private revelation. A tray, a glove, a scent, and a stain. Together they tell a story. What story? Poirot smiled cryptically. Patience, Hastings. First we must untangle the characters. Then the plot shall reveal itself. And with that maddening vagueness, he turned his attention back to the suspects, leaving me no wiser than before. It was during a lull in questioning that I overheard Lady Winifred speaking to herself in a hushed, urgent whisper. She stood by the fireplace, twisting a handkerchief nervously, unaware I was nearby. He knew too much, she murmured. He always knew too much. I relayed this to Poirot, who nodded without surprise. Bien sûr, the keeper of secrets becomes a danger when they are too well kept. Poirot next turned his attention to Cecilia, whose cool elegance faltered when he asked directly about Barrow. I hardly knew him, she said, a touch too quickly. He was my mother's servant, not mine. Yet when Hastings, acting on a hunch of his own, ventured upstairs, he found something most curious, a cufflink, unmistakably engraved with B.B., Barrow's initials, tucked behind the cushion of a chaise longue in Cecilia's boudoir. How do you explain this? I asked. She glanced at the cufflink and then back at me, her expression unreadable. He must have misplaced it. Or visited you, I suggested. Cecilia's smile was thin and unconvincing. I wouldn't know. Meanwhile, Giles Langley, the charming but careless heir, confessed to Poirot that he had quarrelled with Barrow over unpaid wages, a quarrel no one else had witnessed. Poirot listened politely, then tilted his head. You are certain, monsieur, that this quarrel occurred? Of course, Giles insisted. Barrow threatened to expose. He stopped abruptly. Expose what? Poirot asked. Giles laughed nervously. Nothing important. As we stepped back into the hall, Poirot steepled his fingers thoughtfully. Every clue, every confession, they contradict each other, mon ami. Either everyone is lying, or someone is playing a very clever game. The picture was murkier than ever, and Poirot's eyes sparkled with anticipation. It was shortly after midnight when I was roused by an urgent knocking at my door. Bleary-eyed, I opened it to find Lady Winifred standing there in her dressing gown, pale and trembling. She's gone, she whispered hoarsely. Mrs. Plum, she's vanished. For one blissful moment, I thought I must still be dreaming. Gone? I repeated stupidly. But she was here at dinner. She went to the pantry before retiring to check the silver, Lady Winifred said. She always does. And now she's nowhere to be found. By the time I stumbled downstairs, Poirot was already present, immaculate as ever despite the hour. He stood by the pantry door, examining something with great care. Observe, Hastings, he said, the apron. Indeed, on the flagstone floor, lying perfectly folded just outside the pantry, was Mrs. Plum's starched apron. Nothing else was disturbed, no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture. She wouldn't have gone off without it, Lady Winifred fretted. Mrs. Plum would no more abandon her apron than her own skin. And yet, Poirot murmured, she has left it behind. Curious, is it not? I stared at the abandoned garment. Perhaps she went to investigate something or someone and forgot it in her hurry. Poirot's head tilted. Hurry, yes, but fear, Hastings. It is fear that leaves behind folded aprons. He led us to Mrs. Plum's small room, which was empty, her bed unslept in. But on the bedside table lay something even more curious, a half-empty glass of port, and beside it, a book of ghost stories. Ghosts, I exclaimed. You don't suppose— Mon ami, Poirot said sternly. You grow fanciful. Ghosts do not fold aprons. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that Langley Court had more than secrets lurking in its walls. It felt haunted, not by spirits, but by something very human indeed. As dawn broke, Poirot stood at the window of our guest room, his hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette dark against the pale morning light. 2 vanishings, Hastings, he said quietly. 1 butler, 1 housekeeper. I rubbed at my tired eyes. Do you think they ran off together? Eloped, perhaps? Poirot turned, his expression one of profound disappointment. Mon ami, sometimes I fear you are beyond saving. He began to pace the room in that precise, mincing way of his patent leather shoes barely whispering against the rug. No, Hastings, this is not love. It is fear, a fear that grips the house itself. Fear of what? Poirot's finger wagged. That, my friend, is what we must uncover. But this I tell you now, this is no case of a disgruntled servant seeking better wages. No, no, this is a house that buries its secrets deep, and someone who knows too much, has started digging. The glint in his eyes told me the case had fully taken hold of him now. The holiday was over. The chase had begun. Poirot's methods, as I have often remarked, were unlike those of any other detective. Where others might storm into a room demanding alibis and issuing stern threats, Poirot drifted, softly, politely, and with the air of a man who had come merely for a pleasant chat. It was a technique I had seen disarm even the most hardened of criminals. Seated comfortably in the drawing room, a delicate porcelain cup balanced between his fingers, Poirot invited the household members to speak with him, one by one. He asked for nothing more than a little friendly conversation. I wish only to understand the atmosphere of the house, you see, he explained, his tone light, almost indifferent. The house, she has a personality, non? And it is the people who shape it. I knew better, of course. Behind that harmless facade, Poirot's mind was a finely tuned instrument, dissecting every word, every hesitation, every glance exchanged when someone thought no one was looking. Miss Cecilia Langley came first, sweeping into the room with the air of a woman mildly amused by the whole affair. Poirot complimented her gown, admired her bracelet, and within moments had drawn out that she found the entire business of Barrow's disappearance tedious and typically theatrical. Barrow had a taste for melodrama, she said, inspecting her nails. He liked to hint at dark secrets, just to make himself feel important. Poirot merely smiled, but I saw the spark in his eyes. Giles Langley followed, restless and defensive, one eye perpetually on the window as though contemplating escape. Barrow wasn't my problem, he said quickly. He worked for my mother. But you quarrelled with him, did you not? Poirot's voice was gentle, but the question struck its mark. Giles flushed, muttering something about personal grievances. Lastly, Mr. Rathbone, the family solicitor, entered, all starch and stiffness. He had nothing to hide, or so he claimed. The Langley family has always been prone to dramatics, he said. I suspect this is simply another example. Poirot's smile deepened. Perhaps, or perhaps, monsieur, it is the drama that hides the truth. Lady Winifred's interview, by contrast, began quietly. She perched on the edge of the settee, her gloved hands twisting nervously in her lap, and answered Poirot's opening questions with the careful politeness of a woman determined to say just enough, but never too much. It was a masterful performance, until it wasn't. Mr. Barrow, Poirot asked softly. He had been with the family for how long? 20 years, she answered promptly. He was a fixture at Langley Court, And during that time, madame, was he always merely a servant? Her fingers trembled slightly against her knee. What do you mean? Poirot leaned forward just a fraction, his voice still gentle. I ask, because loyalty of such duration is rare, particularly when that loyalty endures through difficulties. There was the faintest hesitation before Lady Winifred smiled, too quickly, too brightly. Barrow was loyal because it was his nature. Indeed, said Poirot, and his gaze flicked ever so briefly toward the fireplace mantel, where a silver-framed photograph stood. It was a photograph of Lady Winifred, younger, laughing at some unseen companion, and there, just visible at the edge of the frame, stood Barrow, his eyes fixed on her with an expression no mere butler should wear. Dear Oliver would never betray me, Lady Winifred said softly, and then froze, her hand flying to her mouth. Poirot's brow lifted. Dear Oliver? Lady Winifred's face drained of colour. I meant Mr. Barrow, of course. But the slip had already been made, and Poirot let the silence stretch just long enough for the implication to settle. Mon ami, Poirot murmured to me after she had fled the room. We begin to see, do we not? The secrets of this house. They are not so much hidden as they are buried beneath layers of polite fiction. I shook my head, still astonished. Do you think there was something between them? Poirot's smile was both sad and triumphant. The heart, Hastings. It makes fools of us all. The atmosphere in the drawing room had become thick with the weight of suspicion. It seemed that every word spoken was wrapped in layers of deception, and every glance exchanged was one of concealed motives. Still, Poirot remained calm, his patience as unshakable as ever, his mind sifting through the threads of the mystery with all the precision of a master weaver. It was Cecilia's turn to speak with him now, and her entry into the room was as grand as her presence. She carried herself with the air of someone who knew how to control her surroundings, yet there was something restless in the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Mademoiselle Langley, I have one question to ask you, only one. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. And what is that? Poirot's voice softened, almost hypnotic in its quiet intensity. I have been thinking, you see, about your late-night wanderings. Cecilia blinked, and then her lips parted, as though she had been prepared for the question, but had not expected it to be asked so directly. I don't know what you mean. Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying her closely. I believe, mademoiselle, that you have been sneaking out into the night, not for some noble purpose, but for a secret rendezvous. She stiffened, her fingers clutching the edge of her chair. What are you talking about? This is absurd. No, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. It is you who are absurd in your attempts to deceive. You see, I know about the meetings you have with someone unexpected. Her face hardened, but only for a moment. Then, with a small, resigned sigh, she leaned forward. You want the truth, don't you? Poirot nodded, his expression one of quiet encouragement. I meet with Mr. Rathbone, she confessed, the words slipping from her mouth like a secret long kept. The family solicitor. The solicitor? I echoed, my voice betraying my surprise. Yes, she said, the hint of a smile curving her lips. You see, I've been meeting with Mr. Rathbone for months now. He and I, well, we formed a connection. Poirot was still, his gaze never leaving her face. A connection of what nature, mademoiselle? Her expression became distant, almost wistful. At first, it was just friendship, a confidant. But then, well, things became more complicated. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. Finally, she said, Barrow knew. He knew about us. And so, Poirot prompted. And so, when he began to threaten me, when he started speaking of exposing us, well, I had to act. I couldn't let him ruin everything. I felt a cold chill run through me as her words sank in. There was a quiet bitterness in her tone, as though she saw Barrow as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Ah, now the plot thickens. The next interview was with Giles Langley, the younger son. He had the air of someone who had spent too many nights in the pursuit of pleasures he could not afford, and the shadow of financial ruin seemed to hang over him like a cloud. As he entered the room, he looked as though he had not slept in days, his face pale, his eyes restless. Poirot offered him a seat, and for a moment, we simply sat in silence, waiting for Giles to speak. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low and heavy with resignation. "You must understand, Poirot, that things have gotten out of hand. My debts, my losses, they're—" He trailed off, clearly struggling to find the words. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving the man. "They are considerable, yes? You have been gambling, monsieur." Giles gave a sharp, bitter laugh. "Gambling. That's the understatement of the year. I've been chasing a fortune that doesn't exist. And you were hoping Barrow could help you find it." Poirot's voice was even, measured, perhaps by borrowing from the family's hidden wealth. Giles's eyes flickered, a flash of panic crossing his features before it was quickly masked. I thought Barrow might have known where something was hidden. A fortune, a legacy, who knows?" He leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. But it didn't work. He laughed at me, he mocked me, and when I asked him to keep quiet about everything, I thought he might finally see reason. But no, he threatened to expose me. Poirot's expression softened ever so slightly. "And so, monsieur, you thought that perhaps blackmail was the answer?" Giles' face twisted in a mixture of shame and desperation. "I didn't want to do it, I swear. But when you're backed into a corner, when you've lost everything, you do things you never thought you would." "And Barrow?" Poirot's question hung in the air. I tried to make him see reason, told him that if he didn't keep quiet, I would—" His voice faltered. But he laughed. He laughed and said he would never be silenced. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It seems, monsieur, that Barrow was indeed a man who knew the truth of everyone. A man who could not be controlled, and yet who was controlling everyone else." Giles nodded, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of his own confession was finally too much to bear. "I never meant for it to go this far." Poirot's gaze softened just a little. "It rarely does, Hastings, but we are all human, after all, and it is our weaknesses, our desires, that lead us to ruin." The French Chef Pierre, was a man of considerable presence, if not for his towering height, then certainly for his flamboyance. He swept into the room with the urgency of a man who could not possibly have the time to spare, yet who seemed to make everyone feel that the very act of serving him was a privilege. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he exclaimed, his round face beaming with exaggerated enthusiasm. "A pleasure, of course. A man of your talents surely understands that cooking. It is an art, not merely sustenance." Poirot, of course, offered him the slightest of smiles, for he had long since learned that food was but a distraction in these cases. "Indeed, Monsieur Pierre," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly. "But we are not here to discuss food, I fear. No, we have matters of a more delicate nature to address." Pierre's expression faltered for a brief moment, barely perceptible, but it was enough for Poirot's keen eyes. Of course, Pierre blustered. "Anything for you, Monsieur Poirot? Tell me, what is it I can assist you with?" "I understand you know Mrs. Plum rather well," Poirot began, as he observed Pierre's reaction carefully. "Mrs. Plum," Pierre scoffed. "The housekeeper? Bah! She is no better than a bitter old woman who has nothing better to do than complain. She speaks of the most ridiculous things that do not concern anyone else." "Ah," said Poirot, his voice smooth as silk. "But she was concerned about Mr. Barrow, non? She feared him." Pierre's eyes darted nervously. "Mrs. Plum is a drunk, monsieur. She cannot even keep track of the wine bottles. How can she be trusted? Poirot raised an eyebrow. A drunk, you say? Interesting, monsieur. Tell me then, why do so many bottles of wine go missing in the kitchen when you are the one overseeing it? Pierre's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. I don't know what you are talking about. The wine is carefully managed, Monsieur Poirot. Everything is accounted for. Poirot smiled ever so slightly. Of course. But you see, monsieur, you are lying. The wine inventory, it does not match the records. How curious, no? Pierre fumbled for words, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Impossible! Impossible! There must be some mistake, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot held up his hand. Enough, Chef Pierre. You see, I am not interested in your wines, monsieur. But your lies, they speak volumes. Poirot's search of the house had uncovered little more than a trail of half-truths and contradictions. The tensions between the household members were palpable, each one hiding something, unwilling to speak freely. Yet it was the unexpected clue that appeared in the fireplace that truly sparked Poirot's interest. As we sat in the dimly lit study, Poirot's eyes caught a flicker of something unusual in the hearth. He rose quickly, his expression sharp with purpose. There, among the embers, was a charred scrap of paper, barely recognizable, but for the faint outline of some words. Ah, Poirot murmured, almost to himself, Mon ami, we are now on the scent. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small pair of delicate tweezers, which he used to carefully lift the fragment from the ashes. With a precise movement he unfolded it, revealing the faintly legible remnants of what had once been a letter. The ink was faded, but I could make out several key words. Langley's secret room. I blinked in confusion. A secret room? But there's no such room in the house, is there? Poirot gave me a look that was both patient and knowing. Ah, Hastings, that is what we must discover. You see, there are always secrets, hidden rooms where memories are stored, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. He studied the fragment of paper intently, as if it were some ancient puzzle that could unlock the entire mystery of Langley Court. A secret room, Hastings. What do we know about the hidden spaces in a house? The places where the unspoken things are concealed? I frowned, puzzled. You think someone hid something important there? Of course, Poirot said, his eyes lighting up. A secret room, a place where Barrow could have uncovered something too dangerous for the others to know, something hidden. This is where we must go, Hastings. This is where we will find the truth. He placed the burnt scrap of paper carefully into his pocket, and I knew immediately that the hunt had shifted gears. It was no longer just about the missing butler. It was about finding the truth behind what Langley Court had buried for so long. It was early the next morning when the household was shaken by the discovery of Mrs. Plum, the housekeeper, locked inside the abandoned wine cellar beneath Langley Court. I had not yet finished my breakfast when Lady Winifred, her face pale with worry, rushed into the room, followed closely by the maid, who was visibly shaking. "Monsieur Poirot!" Lady Winifred gasped. "It's Mrs. Plum! She's been found! She was locked inside the cellar, left there overnight!" Poirot, who had been calmly sipping his coffee, set his cup down with the utmost precision. His eyes sparkled with an unreadable emotion as he stood up. "Ah, a ghostly figure perhaps?" I looked at him in confusion, but he offered no further explanation, simply following Lady Winifred and the maid down the winding corridors. When we arrived at the cellar door, Mrs. Plum was seated on the stone floor, her face drawn and pale, her hands trembling. She seemed far more exhausted than I would have expected from a woman who had been locked away in such a place. Poirot knelt beside her, his voice soft and calm, as though speaking to a frightened child. "Madame, tell me what has happened. How did you come to be here?" Mrs. Plum's voice was shaky, almost breathless. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. One moment I was in the kitchen, the next I found myself in this dark place. And then I saw it. I saw the figure." "A figure?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. "What figure, Mrs. Plum?" Her wide eyes locked onto mine, filled with fear. "A man. A tall figure, dressed in black. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I was pulled into the dark. And then I woke up here. I don't know how I got here, but Poirot's voice cut through the air, calm and measured. "A ghost, Mrs. Plum?" he asked softly. Mrs. Plum nodded, her body trembling. "I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. It was as if a ghost was dragging me, pulling me into the darkness." Poirot sat back on his heels, deep in thought. "Mon ami," he said after a long pause, "there is no ghost here. No, this is something far more human." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A ghost cannot open doors, Hastings. This is not the work of spirits. It is the work of someone very much alive." As the morning passed, Poirot seemed increasingly absorbed in the mystery, his mind working over every clue, every word spoken. His next move, as I soon discovered, was to recreate the last moments before Barrow's disappearance. "I am convinced, Hastings," Poirot said, with a certain gleam in his eye, "that Barrow's disappearance is not as simple as it seems. We must look at where he was before he vanished. We must follow his path." We made our way to the drawing room, the very place where Barrow had last been seen, and Poirot instructed the staff to clear the area, placing everything in its exact position as it had been the night before. "Now," Poirot began, looking at the room critically, "Barrow would have had access to this entire space. Let us see if there are places where someone might hide or escape unseen." His eyes narrowed as they scanned the walls. I followed his gaze as he moved along the far wall, running his fingers gently along the edges of a grand bookcase. Poirot's voice was barely a whisper as he muttered, "Ah, mon ami, there it is." He stopped before a section of the bookcase, his fingers pressing lightly on one of the wooden panels. A soft click echoed through the room, and to my astonishment, a hidden door swung open from behind the shelves. I stared in disbelief. A secret door, right under our noses the entire time. Poirot smiled knowingly. "A house of secrets, Hastings. Always a house of secrets." The door led to a narrow, dimly lit passageway that wound deeper into the house. I could barely make out the shape of the walls before Poirot gestured to me to follow him. "There, Hastings, lies the truth. The secret room, hidden from all, now revealed. Let us discover what Barrow may have uncovered in these hidden halls." The hidden passage was cramped and dark, and as we ventured deeper into Langley Court's secret underbelly, I couldn't help but feel a sense of mounting frustration. This mystery, this endless maze of clues, was beginning to overwhelm me. "Poirot," I said, my voice tight with impatience, "this is madness. We're chasing ghosts, hidden doors, and endless contradictions. What is the truth? Where is it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he simply walked ahead, his step measured and deliberate, as though this was merely another puzzle to solve, another piece to fit into place. I followed, my mind racing with frustration. "You must admit," I continued, "that there are far too many secrets here. A missing butler, a housekeeper who believes she's seen a ghost, and now hidden rooms. None of this makes sense." Poirot stopped abruptly, turning to face me with his piercing gaze. His voice was calm but firm, with a wisdom that could not be ignored. "Hastings, my friend," Poirot said quietly, "you grow too impatient. You think the truth should be swift, like a thief in the night. But you are wrong. Truth is patient. It waits for the right moment, for the right question to be asked. You, Hastings, are too eager to solve the puzzle." I stared at him, my words caught in my throat. Poirot's gaze softened. "The truth, Hastings, it is never as simple as we think. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes an understanding of human nature." I sighed, feeling both chastened and humbled by his words. "You're right, Poirot. I've been too quick to judge." Poirot smiled, his expression still serene. "Patience, Hastings. It is the key to all mysteries." With that, He turned back down the passageway, and I followed, knowing that, for once, the little grey cells would be our guide to unravelling the secret of Langley Court. The grand hall of Langley Court seemed to hum with an electric tension. The shadows of evening had begun to stretch across the room, filling the space with an air of foreboding that only intensified the mystery hanging in the air. Poirot stood before the roaring fire, his back straight, his moustache twitching ever so slightly as he surveyed the room. I, as usual, was trying my best to follow the unfolding events, but there was so much at play that I felt somewhat out of my depth. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Winifred said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what is it that you intend to do now?" Poirot turned, his gaze sharp but gentle. "I must speak to your household, madame. There are truths that are yet to be uncovered." A subtle command passed between Poirot's hands, one that immediately shifted the atmosphere. "I ask that all of your guests, the members of the household, gather here in the hall. Now." He did not raise his voice, but the authority in his words left no room for disagreement. One by one, the suspects arrived, all with a variety of expressions: confusion, anger, uncertainty, each of them now realizing that the investigation was about to reach its climax. As they assembled, Poirot stood before them like a conductor preparing for a final performance. The silver tray and the white glove, now placed on a pedestal in the center of the room, stood as the unmistakable symbols of the mystery. They were no longer mere objects, but central figures in the web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that had been spun within Langley Court's walls. "Mon ami," Poirot said softly, "it is time. Let us see the truth revealed." The suspects fidgeted, eyeing one another, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to transpire. The silence in the room was palpable, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he prepared to dismantle the red herrings, one by one. Poirot stepped forward, his posture as impeccable as ever. "Let us now examine the situation, mes amis. It is time for us all to look at the clues, but not just as they appear, no. We must look beyond the surface. Let us start with the matter of Cecilia's lover." There was an uncomfortable shift in the room. Cecilia looked startled, her pale face momentarily flushed with anger, before she masked it with her usual poised expression. Poirot's voice cut through the tension. "You see, mademoiselle, you thought you could hide your secret. Your lover. You assumed that no one would notice the connection between you and Mr. Rathbone." Cecilia's eyes widened in shock. What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Yes, Monsieur Rathbone, the family solicitor. Not Barrow, as you may have hoped others would believe. You and Mr. Rathbone, your late-night meetings, your secrecy, they have been the source of much misunderstanding." I watched as Cecilia's composure cracked for the briefest moment before she composed herself. But you're wrong. I never..." Poirot raised a hand, gently interrupting her. "You see, mademoiselle, your emotions betray you. The truth is right in front of us. You were not meeting Barrow. You were meeting Mr. Rathbone, as the cufflink you misplaced so cleverly suggested." A murmur passed through the room, but Poirot continued without pause, his eyes now fixed on Giles Langley, who was standing beside his sister, visibly uncomfortable. "Now, Monsieur Giles," Poirot continued, "you also have your secrets, do you not?" Giles flushed, but said nothing, looking down at the floor, avoiding Poirot's piercing gaze. Poirot moved on, as always, one step ahead. "You thought, did you not, monsieur, that you could blackmail Barrow? The poor man had no idea about the family's hidden fortune, but you believed it. You thought that Barrow held the key to a vast treasure hidden within Langley Court's walls. But as I have discovered, Barrow knew nothing of this treasure, and you knew even less." Giles clenched his fists, his voice tight with frustration. "You don't understand. I was desperate. I had nothing left." His voice shook, but Poirot was unfazed. I understand perfectly, monsieur, Poirot said softly, his eyes unblinking. Desperation leads men to make foolish decisions. Blackmail was not the answer. Poirot looked at the assembled group, each one now uncomfortable under the weight of his words. There was no hidden fortune, no secrets of great value, only the human desire to control what is lost. He paused, allowing the silence to settle before he spoke again. Now, we move on. The tension in the room was thick enough to be cut with a knife. I had known that something was afoot with Giles Langley, but hearing Poirot's words, spoken with such calm and certainty, left me with no doubt. Giles's motives, hidden beneath a veil of charm and youthful recklessness, were now laid bare. Poirot turned his attention fully to Giles, whose discomfort had turned to barely concealed hostility. You, monsieur, are a gambler, a man who believes that risk and reward are intertwined, but in this case, your gamble failed. Giles stared at Poirot, his mouth dry, his eyes narrowing. You're wrong, I was only trying to survive. Survive? Poirot repeated, his voice a mixture of amusement and disappointment. Non, monsieur, you gambled with Barrow's life, but you gambled on the wrong thing. You believed that Barrow held the secret to a hidden fortune, when in fact, he knew nothing about it. You allowed your desperate mind to believe in something that was never there. I was struck by the audacity of it. Giles had thought he could manipulate Barrow, perhaps even make him an accomplice in a scheme that didn't exist. But Poirot's deduction was irrefutable. You threatened Barrow with exposure, Poirot continued, his voice growing colder. You believed that his silence would come at a price, your price, but Barrow refused. And so, you turned to threats. Giles clenched his jaw. He was never going to keep quiet. I had nothing left. Nothing. But you were wrong, monsieur, Poirot said with finality. Barrow held no secret. It was you who were the fool. The room fell silent. The truth, for all its simplicity, was now so plain that none could deny it. Giles' blackmail attempt had been based on nothing more than a delusion, a desperate hope that Barrow held the key to a treasure that did not exist. Poirot, always calm, always measured, turned his gaze to the others in the room, his words cutting through the air like a knife. The pieces of this puzzle are falling into place. The question now, mes amis, is who among you has more to hide, and who among you is ready to reveal the truth? The tension had reached its peak by the time Poirot turned his attention back to Mrs. Plum, the housekeeper who had, until then, remained a peripheral figure in the investigation. We had discovered her hiding in the wine cellar, a place long abandoned, and now it was time for Poirot to unravel her role in the mystery. Mrs. Plum, Poirot began softly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. You have, how shall I put it, a most curious habit, one that I believe you have kept well hidden. Mrs. Plum, who had been sitting rigidly in the drawing room, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her hands, tightly clasped in her lap, trembled slightly as she stared at Poirot with wide eyes. She began, but Poirot cut her off with a gesture. Let us not waste time, madame. There is something you have been doing, something that explains your fear of Mr. Barrow. She looked at him with a mixture of guilt and resignation. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's voice grew more insistent. The wine, Mrs. Plum, the missing wine. You've been stealing from the cellar, haven't you? She flushed, her face turning a deep shade of red. Stealing? I never. You have, Poirot said gently but firmly. Stolen rare bottles from the Langley cellar. The wine that was stored there for special occasions, the most valuable, the most sought after. He paused, watching her reaction closely. You stole them, not for profit, but for personal reasons. Mrs. Plum's mouth quivered as she looked down at her hands. I needed them, Monsieur Poirot. I had debts, small ones, but they accumulated. The wine, it was an easy way to pay them off. I couldn't afford to face anyone, to ask for help. Poirot leaned in slightly, his voice soft but clear. You were afraid of Barrow, weren't you? Afraid that he would expose you? Mrs. Plum nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, monsieur. He knew. He had seen me in the cellar sneaking the bottles away. I tried to make him see reason, but he threatened to tell Lady Winifred. Poirot's gaze softened. It was not Barrow that you feared, Mrs. Plum. It was the loss of control, the fear that your small, private crime would be exposed and everything would come crashing down. Mrs. Plum wiped her eyes and nodded, a sob escaping her lips. I didn't want to lose my job. It was all I had left. Poirot gave a sympathetic nod. Ah, Mrs. Plum, you thought the threat from Barrow was the danger, but it was your own fear, your own actions, that led to this. A petty theft, yes, but one that kept you shackled. With that, Poirot stood, his eyes never leaving her face. Now, Mrs. Plum, you are free to tell the truth. Let us move forward and see the real picture of Langley Court. The moment of truth had arrived. Poirot turned toward Lady Winifred with a kind but steady look. She had remained a figure of calmness throughout the investigation, always careful with her words, always hiding behind her composure. But the time for veils and masks was over. Madame Langley, Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, we have arrived at the heart of this case. You and I have spoken much, and now I will speak plainly. Lady Winifred looked at him with a raised brow, but there was a trace of fear behind her eyes, one that she was trying desperately to conceal. Barrow, Poirot continued, was not only your butler. No, madame, he was also your secret lover, the man who knew more than he should, the man who helped you cover up the death of your husband. I was taken aback by the suddenness of the revelation, and I noticed that Lady Winifred's hand, which had been resting on the arm of her chair, suddenly clenched tightly. That's impossible, she gasped, her voice trembling for the first time. You're wrong, Monsieur Poirot. You have no idea what you're talking about. Poirot stood his ground. But I do, madame. Your husband, Lord Langley, did not die from some tragic accident, as you would have everyone believe. No, he was involved in an incident. A fall. A terrible fall. It was Barrow who helped you cover it up. He helped you keep the truth hidden from your children and from the world. Lady Winifred's breath caught in her throat. You don't know anything, she snapped, though there was a desperation in her voice that betrayed her. Poirot's voice softened. I know that you were afraid, madame. Afraid that the truth would come out. That Barrow, once a loyal companion, had become a threat to your control over Langley Court and your children. The silence was thick, the weight of Poirot's words sinking into the room like stones. Lady Winifred stood up, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. I never wanted to harm anyone, she whispered. I did what I had to do. For the children, for the estate. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. You never wanted harm, madame. Perhaps. But it is your secrets, your lies that have led us here. You and Barrow, together, you kept your past buried, hoping no one would uncover it. Lady Winifred sank back into her chair, defeated. I thought I could control everything. I thought I could protect them, protect myself. But now, I see. Poirot nodded, his gaze calm. Now you see, madame, that the past always catches up with us. No secret, no matter how deep, remains buried forever. The revelation of Lady Winifred's dark past was only the beginning. The final key to the mystery lay in the hidden letter. The letter Barrow had discovered that revealed the existence of a long-lost fortune. Poirot, with his usual careful precision, explained how the discovery had come about. It was not just Barrow's disappearance that was at stake, Hastings. It was the knowledge he had uncovered in the estate's hidden rooms. A letter, one that Barrow found, and one that you could not afford to have exposed. I looked at Poirot, struggling to grasp the full scope of the situation. You mean to say this letter contained the secret of a fortune? a fortune that could have disrupted everything. Precisely, Poirot confirmed. A fortune that Lady Winifred had concealed for years. A legacy left by her husband, one that would have gone to her children, not to her. And it was Barrow, ever the observant butler, who uncovered it by chance. But why, I asked, did Lady Winifred feel the need to hide it so desperately? Poirot's eyes darkened. Because, my friend, control is the ultimate currency. If Barrow had revealed the contents of the letter, Winifred's control over her children and the estate would have been lost. The power, the money, and the authority would pass to them, not to her. Is that why she feared him? I asked, finally starting to piece everything together. Exactly, Poirot said. Barrow had become more than a butler. He was a threat, a man who held the power to change everything. He knew the truth, and it was that truth, that hidden fortune, that ultimately led to his death. With those final words, the mystery of Langley Court was unveiled. The web of lies, the secrecy, and the fears that had bound its inhabitants were now all too clear. Poirot, with his usual calm brilliance, had unravelled the truth. The room grew tense as Poirot turned toward Lady Winifred, his expression calm yet tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. The time had come to reveal the truth, and there was no turning back now. Madame Langley, Poirot began, his voice low and deliberate. You thought yourself clever, did you not? You staged Mr. Barrow's disappearance, and in doing so, you believed you could control the course of events. But you forgot one crucial element. You underestimated me. Lady Winifred's eyes flickered nervously, though she quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot raised a hand to silence her. I am not speaking of mere disappearances. No, madame. I am speaking of theatre. A carefully crafted performance designed to mislead. The butler, Mr. Barrow, he did not vanish on his own. He was made to vanish. The silence in the room thickened, and I could feel the atmosphere shift. Poirot's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. You see, Poirot continued, you wanted to create a situation, a mystery that would divert suspicion from you. But what you did not anticipate was that, in your desperation, you would leave behind a trail that I would follow, step by step, like a spider tracking its prey. Lady Winifred's face had gone pale, her lips trembling. I didn't, she began to protest, but Poirot's voice was firm. No, madame. You locked Mrs. Plum away in the wine cellar to keep her from exposing you. She had already overheard Barrow's threats to reveal the truth. He knew about your husband's death, and he knew about the fortune. You could not risk him speaking, so you staged his disappearance to silence him, just as you staged Mrs. Plum's disappearance to keep her quiet. I was stunned. It made perfect sense, and yet the intricacy of the plot left me breathless. Poirot leaned closer, his gaze never leaving Lady Winifred's eyes. You thought you could escape, but no, madame, you cannot escape the truth. Your secrets, your lies, they have all been laid bare. Lady Winifred slumped into her chair, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fear. I didn't want it to go this far. I only wanted to keep control. Poirot's voice softened, but his words were still full of authority. Ah, madame, control. It is a dangerous thing to desire, especially when it comes at such a high cost. The truth has a way of finding us, no matter how deep we bury it. As the truth of Lady Winifred's actions began to settle over the room, Poirot gestured toward the silver tray and the white glove that had been placed at the centre of the investigation. Ah, mon ami, he said, his eyes gleaming. Now we come to the final piece of the puzzle. I had suspected the objects were significant, but hearing Poirot's words, I could feel a shiver of realization. Those objects, Poirot continued, were not left behind by accident. No, they were part of a theatrical performance, a ghostly spectacle designed to invoke fear and to shift suspicion away from the living. The silver tray, with its single white glove, had been placed at the exact center of the dining table, the scene of the crime. The effect was chilling, almost supernatural. The tray and glove had been positioned with meticulous care to suggest the ghost of an ancient family curse, long thought to have been buried with the past. The ghostly figure, Poirot said softly, was not a spirit at all. It was a man, a living man, creating the illusion of a haunting to confuse the mind and stir up old superstitions. The tray, with its symbolic placement, had been meant to evoke the tragic legend of the Langley family ghost, a tale of death and betrayal that had plagued the family for generations. Poirot smiled, as though the answer was both obvious and perfectly logical. You see, Hastings, the glove and tray, these were meant to mislead, to convince you that the supernatural was at work. But in truth, the only force at work here was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing control. With all the pieces now laid bare before us, Poirot stood before the gathered suspects, his arms folded across his chest, his voice steady and calm. And so, mes amis, we arrive at the truth. The true ghost that has haunted Langley Court is not a spectre, a shadow of the past. No, no, the real ghost was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of loss, and above all, fear of being exposed. The room fell silent as Poirot's words lingered in the air, each syllable carrying the weight of revelation. I looked around, noticing how each of the suspects shifted uncomfortably, as though they could still feel the presence of that invisible fear creeping closer. Lady Winifred, Poirot continued, his eyes now focused entirely on her. You staged Barrow's disappearance, not to conceal a crime, but to conceal your own secret life. You feared what would happen if the world found out that Barrow had been not just your butler, but your accomplice, your lover, and the man who helped you cover up your husband's accidental death. Lady Winifred's face remained pale, but she did not argue. She had no defense left, not after the damning evidence Poirot had presented. Mrs. Plum, Poirot turned to the housekeeper. You were not the victim of a ghost, but of a fearful woman who believed that exposing the truth about Barrow would ruin her control over the estate and her children. You became the unwitting pawn in Lady Winifred's scheme. Poirot's voice grew softer, more reflective. And the ghost that was supposed to haunt this house was not an apparition at all, but the fear that consumes us all. The fear of being found out. It was a fear that drove every action, every lie, every secret. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each suspect, as if reading their souls. And now, my friends, the fear is over. The truth is revealed. Poirot turned to me with a wry smile. Mon ami, do you see? The truth is rarely simple, but it is always logical. And it is never the supernatural that haunts us, but the choices we make. It was after the shocking revelations about Lady Winifred's secret past that Poirot turned his attention to the final piece of the puzzle, the missing butler, Barrow. For hours, we had been led to believe that his disappearance was part of an elaborate scheme. But now, as Poirot's mind worked through the clues, something told me the truth was far less convoluted. Poirot had been silently reflecting, his sharp eyes glinting as they scanned the room. Mon ami, he said suddenly, I believe we must return to the place where this all began. We made our way to the secret room behind the bookcase, Poirot's every step measured and precise. As we descended the hidden stairwell, I felt a growing sense of unease. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Poirot knelt beside an old wine vault beneath the floor, forgotten and barely touched. With a soft click, he lifted a hidden trapdoor. The sight that greeted us was more astonishing than I could have imagined. Barrow, alive but weak and dishevelled, lying on the cold stone floor. Ah, Monsieur Barrow, Poirot said with a grin, his voice full of relief. You have been found at last. Barrow's eyes fluttered open, and he coughed weakly. I thought I would die down here. Poirot smiled, his tone warm but firm. You were never in danger, monsieur. Only misunderstood. Now, let us get you to safety. Barrow's ordeal was over. But for us, the case was far from finished. With Barrow safely recovered, the atmosphere in Langley Court had changed. The tension that had permeated every room now began to dissipate. And it was Lady Winifred, finally confronted with the consequences of her actions, who came to face us. She sat in the drawing room, her face pale, her hands trembling. The weight of the truth had settled heavily upon her, and Poirot's presence seemed to have brought all her fears to the surface. Madame Langley, Poirot began, his voice soft. You have much to say, I believe. The truth, it seems, has been a long time coming. Lady Winifred looked up at him, her expression one of profound sorrow. I never wanted any of this, she whispered. Barrow. He was my confidant, my only true ally. But fear, Poirot, fear consumed me. She broke down, her tears falling freely. When he found that letter, the one from my late husband, revealing a fortune hidden away, I feared that if he told anyone, I would lose everything. My children, the estate, everything I had worked so hard to control. Poirot nodded, his gaze understanding. And so you kept the truth hidden, madame. You thought you could protect your family, but in doing so, you lost your own soul. Lady Winifred's sobs were quiet now, but her confession had finally set her free. I loved him, Poirot, but I was afraid of losing it all. Poirot's eyes softened. Ah, madame, it is love and fear that make fools of us all. As Lady Winifred's confession lingered in the air, I found myself still reeling from the complexity of the emotions involved. It was hard to comprehend how someone so composed on the surface could be driven to such lengths by fear and love. Poirot, sensing my confusion, turned to me with a knowing look. Mon ami, he said softly, you are troubled by this. You do not understand the complexity of the heart, do you? I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. I suppose. I don't. I can understand fear of losing wealth or power, but love, it's a different matter entirely. It clouds everything. Poirot smiled, his expression gentle. Ah, Hastings, love, it is the most complicated emotion of all. We think ourselves clever, we think we control it, but in the end it controls us. I frowned, still struggling to grasp the depth of it all. So, Barrow's loyalty to Lady Winifred, it was all for love. Precisely, Poirot replied, his voice warm with wisdom. And in the end, it was fear of exposure that drove her to act. The truth, it was never so simple. But when you look at the human heart, Hastings, truly look, you will see that it is always love and fear that drive us. I shook my head, marveling at his insight. I'll never understand it, Poirot. Poirot's smile deepened, a playful glint in his eye. That, mon ami, is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. Just as I thought we were nearing the end of the case, Poirot and I were preparing to leave Langley Court, our task complete. Barrow had been safely returned, and Lady Winifred had been exposed. The estate was once again in order, but our next destination beckoned. Mon ami, Poirot said as we prepared to leave the house. I have had enough of this foggy English countryside for one lifetime. Monte Carlo, it calls to me. I laughed. Monte Carlo? Well, that sounds far more relaxing than the madness we've been through here. But as we made our way toward the door, the sound of the telephone interrupted our plans. Poirot, ever so calm, picked it up. It was a telegram. Ah, Poirot said, looking at the message with interest. It seems, Hastings, our journey will be delayed. An urgent case in Monte Carlo, missing pearls. He raised an eyebrow, a glint of excitement in his eyes. It seems my little grey cells shall never rest. I smiled, despite myself. I suppose you'll be off to solve another mystery. Poirot's smile was broad, his voice rich with anticipation. But of course, there is always more to discover, Hastings. The mysteries of the world never cease. Just as we were about to make our departure, there was one final twist, one that would leave us all shaking our heads in disbelief. Poirot, as always, had been quietly observing everything, even the smallest details, when he turned to me with a knowing glance. "You see, Hastings, there is one more matter we must address." I raised an eyebrow, completely caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Poirot smiled faintly. Chef Pierre, the jovial Frenchman who cooked for everyone, was not as innocent as he appeared. You see, it was he who forged the burnt letter, the one that led us all down the path of ghosts and secrets. My jaw dropped. "Pierre? But he's so harmless." Poirot's eyes glinted with amusement. "Ah, but that, my friend, is precisely the brilliance of it. Chef Pierre used the letter to create fear, to drive the family into a frenzy, hoping they would flee. And why? To steal the priceless wine collection stored here in Langley Court." I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. "He was after the wine?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, Hastings. It was a clever scheme, one that played on the family's superstitions and fears. And all the while, Pierre remained the harmless comic relief, unnoticed." With a final, knowing smile, Poirot shook his head. "Ah, Hastings, it is always the smallest details that lead to the most startling truths. As we look back at the unraveling of this intricate mystery, one thing stands clear. Truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried." Lady Winifred tried to cover up her past. Barrow fought to maintain control over secrets, and Chef Pierre spun a web of deception with his forged letter. Yet despite their best efforts to conceal the truth, Poirot's sharp mind, guided by human nature and psychological insight, always brings the hidden truths into the light. Poirot, in his usual calm manner, demonstrated once again that no mystery, no matter how complex, is beyond his little grey cells. He understood that it is not only the evidence that speaks, but the motives behind the actions, the fears, the desires, the human weakness that drive every decision. With each clue carefully examined and each character carefully observed, the case was solved in the only way Poirot knows best, with logic, patience, and a touch of his unparalleled intuition. And so, the truth was revealed. A web of love, fear, and desperation, all tangled up with lies and misplaced control. The final revelation was simple yet profound. The only thing that can truly haunt a person is the truth they are hiding. Now, my dear viewers, let me leave you with a thought. What do you think was the most telling clue that led Poirot to uncover Lady Winifred's dark past? Was it the secret letter, the suspicious behavior of the suspects, or perhaps something as simple as the wine cellar secret? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think truly revealed the mystery behind the disappearances? If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. And remember, there are plenty more mysteries ahead. Poirot's mind is always at work, and new cases are just around the corner. Stay tuned for more captivating adventures with the little Belgian detective and his ever-curious friend, Hastings. Until then, mes amis, keep your minds sharp and your observations keen.